Hello everybody, so today we're going to be talking about direct and indirect object pronouns to start. So first off, what is a direct object and what is an indirect object? So before we can even get to that, let me tell you a little bit about some parts of a phrase. So as we know, so let me think of a phrase, so we can say something like ella le pasa la pelota a él, okay? Which in English is equivalent of she passes the ball to him. Now, in these phrases, we know that the subject from what we've looked at already, we know that the subject pronoun is the one that answers the question who. So who passes the ball to him? It's she, so that's our subject. And we know that the verb is the action. So in this case, it's passes, or we could even say, so that's the verb. Now we have these two, the rest of this phrase, which is the ball to him. This is what we call the verb complements, because they complement the verb. They tell you more about the verb. Now, there's two types of complements that you can see in this phrase, and I'm going to highlight them for you. The first one is the ball. Okay? So that's complement number one, and then we have to him, and that's complement number two. Now, complement number one is what we call a direct object, while complement number two is what we call an indirect object. And I'm going to show you in a second exactly how to differentiate between them and what the role that these two elements in a phrase have. Okay? So, and that would just be and we're going to get to all the elements in the Spanish phrase there. But, so let's look a little bit closer. So what is a direct object? A direct object, just like you can see up here, answers to the question, what? Okay? So if we go back to the example up here, she passes the ball to him. If I say she passes what? She passes the ball. So the ball is a direct object. Okay, we can see it again here in this other example where we say ella come pan, or she eats bread. She eats what? She eats bread. That's the direct object. Okay, now we learned before as well that pronouns are words that can be used to replace nouns. In this case, we have the noun the ball, and a direct object pronoun would be a word that we can use to replace the noun the ball. Oops. Let me just go back there. The noun the ball. In the case of our example down here, ella come pan, if we want to replace the word pan in English, or bread in English, we would say she eats it. She eats it. And then you've replaced it with a direct object pronoun. So it, in this case, is your direct object pronoun. In Spanish, we have something very similar. Now, there's a couple differences. Number one, notice how in English, the pronoun stays in the same spot as the object was, right? So we have eat, she eats bread, she eats it. All you've done is replace it. In Spanish, however, all of a sudden, it's going to change position. So the direct object noun is after the verb, come pan. The object pronoun is going to come before the bread. Before the verb. Thinking about bread now. Ella lo come. Now, we're going to look into indirect objects in a bit, but I just want to keep going talking about the direct object pronouns to kind of stay on the same topic. Now, as you can see, we have 4 different direct object pronouns in Spanish. We have lo, we have la, los, and las. These ones each of these pronouns are going to match the noun that they are trying to replace. So if the noun that you are trying to replace, so the what, is masculine singular, so if it's masculine and singular, you're going to use lo. If it's masculine and plural, you're going to use los. If it's feminine and singular, you're going to use la. And if it's feminine and plural, you're going to use las. Okay? So let's take a look at some examples here. So over here we see this girl, and she's taking a photo. So in English we would say she takes a photo. In Spanish we're going to say ella toma una foto. Okay? So now if I want to replace the direct object pronoun, first I need to identify it. So what is my direct object pronoun? Let me ask this. She takes what? A photo. Ella toma ¿qué? Una foto. Now, I can tell from this that my direct object pronoun is feminine singular. How can I tell? By looking at the determiner. The determiner is una, right? So I know it's a singular object because it's not unas. And it ends in a. I have a determiner that ends in a, so it's feminine. Now notice here that I wouldn't be able to depend just on the form of the noun, because foto in Spanish actually ends in o, so that might be misleading, which is why this is an opportunity to see that you need to take a look at all of the clues that you have in the phrase. Now, how am I going to replace it? Well, I can go back to my chart here and say I have a noun that is feminine and it's singular, so I'm going to use la. So I'm going to write ella la toma. Again, keeping in mind that once I replace it with a pronoun, it's going to go before the verb. So it's going to change position. I'm going to give you now a chance to give this a shot with the next one, right? So in this case, we have a guy and he's selling flowers. So I'm going to say he sells flowers. Oh. Flowers. Él vende. I'm going to say las flores, which actually translates sells the flowers. Okay, so I'm going to give you a chance to give this a try on your own. And when you're ready, if you have any questions about this, you can always post it on the discussion board and the grammar question forum. Elements that are missing. Now let's take a look at indirect object pronouns. So in the previous slide, we looked at direct objects, and we now know what a direct object is, which answers to the question, what? And we know what a direct object pronoun is and how to use them. Now let me take a look at indirect objects. So what is an indirect object? Again, if we take a look at the phrase we had before, where we had ella le pasa la pelota a él, like we have up here, we saw that the verb takes two complements in this case. We have the complement one, which is direct object, and then we have this other complement here, a él, which is to him, and that's our second complement. And this is what we call an indirect object. In this case, if we said that a direct object answers to the question what, an indirect object is going to answer to the question to whom or to what. Okay? So this is how you can see that in this phrase above, a él is indirect object because it means to him. So she passes the ball. She passes what? The ball, that's your direct object. She passes the ball to whom? A él, to him. So that is your indirect object. Okay? So that's what an indirect object is. Now let's take a look at how these elements in the phrase are used. Now in English, you see something here. You say, he brings flowers to his mom. Right? So it's you usually have a preposition such as to, right here, to his mom. And if you wanted to use a indirect object pronoun, there's two ways that you can do it in English. Number one, you can just replace his mom with her, right? So he brings flowers to her instead of to his mom. And the other thing you can do in English is you can say he brings her flowers. and you still have the same meaning. Now in Spanish, things work a little bit different because, and this is actually kind of a confusing point sometimes, so don't feel too bad if it takes a little while for it to get used to. But using an indirect object pronoun is mandatory in Spanish sentences when you're talking about doing someone to whom or to what, such as passing something on to someone, talking to someone. Anytime that there's a to someone, you have to have an indirect object pronoun in Spanish. It's obligatory. So you can see it even on this side. Él le trae flores a su mamá. That's what you see here. Él le trae flores a su mamá. If you translated this directly, it would actually sound a little bit redundant in English because it would literally translate to he brings her flowers to his mom. But that is actually one way that you can say it in Spanish, and it sounds perfectly fine. Now, again, just like in English, everything kind of works the same, where you can replace su mamá, his mom, with ella, right? So you can go from to his mom to her, to ella, right here. Now, something else that you can do, so if we saw that in English you can say he brings her flowers. In Spanish, the other option that you have is that you can just drop the a ella. So you can just completely get rid of this and still have a phrase, so a grammatical phrase where you have él le trae flores, and that's fine as well. Now let's take a quick look here at the different direct object pronouns in Spanish. So you have, in English, you have these versions. You have to me, to you, and then you have him, so to him, to her, to us, this is supposed to say yo. So I'm just going to change it here really quick. So this is supposed to say to you all. And then you have to them and to them, where this one's a ellos, masculine and feminine. Okay. In Spanish, you have the exact same elements that you could translate almost directly word by word, where you have a mí, which is to me, a ti, which is to you. Then you have a él, a ella, a nosotros, a ustedes, and then you have a ellos and a ellas. So far, it's pretty much identical to English. Now here's the part where it gets a little tricky, is that once you put in this element here, you have to put in the indirect object pronoun before the verb that matches that. Okay? So you will have me, te, le, nos for nosotros, les for ustedes, les for ellos, and les for ellas. So the good news is that there's not that many to remember, and there is a pattern to follow. So if you can see, me and te are the ones that are most different. Then you have le for him and her, and then you have les, and les for you all, they masculine and they feminine. So really the ones you have to keep an eye for is nos, which is for nosotros, me and te. And remember, I put them in brackets here, so that's one more thing that I just want to reiterate. But I put them in brackets here because these are optional. You can drop them and still have a phrase, but these ones are not. So you need to make sure that this matches whatever it is that the action is, or the person the action is directed to, right? Okay, so let's see an example, because I feel that that's always the best way to see these things in action. So over here we see this cute little guy, and he's giving the girl a flower. So we say, él le da una flor a ella, which translates to he gives, let me just go back on that for a sec. He gives her a flower, but I want to try to match it as close as possible. He gives a flower to her. Okay, so now if I wanted to replace the indirect object pronoun, because it's a ella, that's where you put le, right? Because you have a ella, and if you go back on your chart, you can see that to her is le. Now I can change it and make it become él le da una flor. And that's that. Okay? Now, in this case, again, I'm going to give you a chance, and I'm just going to put it in English. I'm going to have you guys try and translate it into Spanish on your own. And again, if you have questions or you have difficulty with this, make sure to put it into the grammar questions forum, and we'll talk it through together, which is always a great way to create discussion and to clarify concepts. Okay? So I'm going to have he passes the ball to him. Okay. So you can have él, and I'm going to translate the verb for you. Él pasa la pelota. And now it's up to you to write in the two elements that are missing.